My guest today is Anita Dhake. She graduated from the University of Chicago Law School over a decade ago, worked in big law for a number of years, and then early retired at 33 after paying off her student loans and building up a retirement nest egg. She's long-term traveled all over the world since, and her story has been featured in Forbes, PBS NewsHour, Mr. Money Mustache, and other publications. She also previously wrote a book about her experiences called Operation Enough: How to Retire Remarkably Early. I invited her to come onto the podcast today to share advice and tips about early retirement from a legal career. Anita, thanks so much for joining us today to share your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
So I know we were just talking a moment ago because we recorded a bunch of this and then my computer crashed, and I hope it goes more smoothly this time. But for audience orientation, in what year did you early retire, and what was your career path before retiring?
I retired in October of 2013. I worked as a lawyer for 5 years before that. And then, of course, there was law school before that. And then before that, I worked as a flight attendant for a little while. And before that, I worked as an insurance claims handler adjustment. Very exciting stuff.
Very cool. What kind of legal work were you doing after law school, but before retiring?
So I worked for corporations mostly. I was a corporate attorney. So I did mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, corporate governance, helping companies do their SEC filings, that kind of stuff.
When did you decide that you wanted to retire early? And was there a single moment of recognition, or was it a gradual realization?
I knew pretty early on in life that I wanted to retire early. When I was 17 or so, I read this book called Your Money, Your Life, which basically helps you break down, to figure out what you're actually earning if you take it into account, like commute times and clothes and all this other stuff that you'd be doing if you wouldn't be spending money on if you weren't working. So I read that book really young, and I put retire early on my life bucket list that I had started when I was a kid. So I had been thinking about it for decades.
And what was the life that you had envisioned having in early retirement after sort of crossing over to the promised land?
The number one thing I wanted to do was be able to sleep in, because I hate waking up to an alarm clock, and I just wanted to be able to set my own schedule, and I wanted to be able to do things during the day if I wanted to. I didn't want my life to revolve around work. So that was the number one thing. I wanted to be able to read as much as I wanted. I wanted to be able to pursue writing as a full-time job, I guess. I've loved to write since I was a kid, and I kind of pictured myself being a big author. I wanted to travel, of course. I just didn't want to be a slave to somebody else, a slave to my job, a slave to a paycheck. I wanted what I considered the ultimate freedom, just to be able to live my life in my own way.
So how did you come up with your FIRE number in terms of like calculating the budget or the burn rate that you would need to live on, factoring in things like, travel or accommodation, food, any unexpected expenses, buffer, etc.? How did you actually get the confidence to estimate, what you would need without having to, ever go back to work in the future? In the future, it can be a kind of a nerve-wracking and imprecise science. So I'm curious, what was your thought process?
So I've been keeping track of my expenses since, basically I started working at 20. So I knew very, pretty clearly like how much I needed and what I wanted. When I first started working as a lawyer, my number was $450,000, because that, if you extrapolate it from the 4% rule, which I'm sure everyone who listens to this podcast and you probably know about, it's just a very typical way of figuring out your future expenses. It's just thinking about how much the stock market returned in the past, and inflation and all that stuff. So I had my $450,000 number, which would give me $1,500 a month, which was about what I was spending my first few years as a lawyer in Chicago. So I figured that was what I needed.
Got it. How did you stay focused? And when I imagine many of your law school classmates who were making, six figures right out of law school, they were making a lot of money, were starting perhaps to upgrade their lifestyles, buy homes, cars, start families, etc., while you were trying to save up to retire early?
I think I was being a little naive when I was doing it, to be honest. For me personally, it was just my personality. Like, at first it was like I have no interest in having a fancy car. I wanted to travel completely, and so I didn't really care about having a nice house. Um, I'm small, so it's very hard for me to find clothes that fit. So like online shopping was never something I ever really did as a hobby or something fun. Most of my clothes are hand-me-downs from my older sisters, so I was very lucky in that regard. And like I said, I just never online shopped. I think I've bought something off Amazon maybe nine less than 10 times in my life for sure. Um, so this is something I say a lot. It's like I buy whatever I want whenever I want. I just don't want that much. So I think most of it was just um, a facet of my personality that I live a very simple life and I didn't want that much. And it was much more satisfying for me to see my net worth grow than to like buy something shiny.
How did you think about, as you were saving up your retirement nest egg, how did you think about the big concern that, at least in America, many people have, which is around healthcare and insurance costs, because, we don't have universal healthcare in the U.S. and the cost of care is pretty expensive, even though it may be cheaper outside of the country. How did you start to prepare for that?
I did not prepare for it at all. I was very, very naive in that regard, and I did not spend much time thinking about it. And I think if I had, I would have been a lot more wary about retiring if I had thought about it. Um, I guess my thought process was that even if I was working, I could still go bankrupt from a catastrophic illness or injury. And it didn't seem like a reason to put my life on hold and to do things that keep working a job that I didn't really like. There'd be no possibility that something might happen. And when I first retired, I just did Obamacare. So I paid $200 a month for health insurance with a very high deductible. And I just didn't use my insurance at all. I went to a physical every year and I was in perfect health. So I didn't really worry about it. I've been very lucky in that regard. So that's what I did for the first 2 years or so. And then I was talking on the phone with an Obamacare representative, and, I realized that they don't really care about net worth. They only care about income. So, when I was filling out the forms, I told them absolutely everything. I, gave them a list of my assets and showed them what I had, and I sent them my tax returns and everything. And all they really cared about was your monthly income. And I wasn't making any money. I have a blog and I have a book, but I don't really make any money off of them. So the only income I had was from, whatever random tax capital gain things that the government taxes me on for my nest egg, which is always pretty low. So my total monthly income was below the Medicaid line. So I qualified for Medicaid. So now I don't pay anything for my health insurance. I don't really use it, but it's there in case I need it.
Seems like a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
Was there a specific fire date you had in mind, or a specific target you knew you needed to hit? And what considerations went into that date or number?
I didn't have a specific date. When I first started working, my only goal was to pay off my student loans. I think when I actually started, I had $95,000, and before that, I had over 100 grand before I started just aggressively tackling it. So my goal was just to pay off my student loans, and I kind of estimated that would take me 3 years. I was super aggressive about it, and it took me about a year to do it. And then after that, I was like, well, I like my nest egg grows so quickly. I'm going to build up an emergency fund first, and then I did that, and then it just my number was $450,000. I was like, if I can get it, I can work as long as I can. If I can get as close to it as possible, then I can, if I burn out, then I'll find another job. But I kept working, kept doing the corporate law thing, hit 450,000. And then my law firm was like, hey, do you want to move to Sydney, Australia and hang out there for a couple of years? And I was like, hell yes, that sounds amazing. Because living in a foreign country was also on my life bucket list. So I moved there and I kept working, and I passed, my second goal was $600,000. For some reason, that was like $2,000 per month in income. And I kept blowing past the numbers. And then October 2015, my secondment was up, and they were like, if you want to come back to the Chicago office, you're more than welcome. And I just decided that was a good place in my life to stop, and retired at that point.
Gotcha. Sydney's beautiful. I went there on my honeymoon with my wife.
Oh,
and,
nice.
definitely one of the most laid back places. Since you were paying off your student loans, first, it sounds like you had a good chunk of student loan debt. Did you save and pay off your loans in parallel while saving for retirement, or did you pay off all your loans first before beginning to save up?
So I paid into my official 401k the entire time. So I think it was like the max was like 16.5 or 17.5, 18.5. I don't remember the exact number, but I always put that much into my 401k, and I always kept about $5,000 in cash. But every penny above that would go to my student loans. So I didn't save anything in parallel besides the 16 whatever.
Got it. And after your loans were paid off, were you continuing to just max out your tax deferred accounts, and then everything else went into just regular taxable kind of plain vanilla brokerage accounts?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for this. I don't pay attention at all to taxes, and I realize that's one of my downfalls. That I probably could have saved a lot more money if I had done the conversion ladder and all those other tax bag dodging stuff that you can do. But I couldn't be bothered with it. I was making so much money, and it didn't really seem like an interesting use of my time. So I was lazy, and I just like I said, I maxed out my 401k, which was easy. And then every other penny went to my one investment account, which was the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund.
Got it. So you were investing strictly in passive index funds for your retirement fund rather than individual securities?
Yeah. So as a lawyer, as a corporate lawyer, there's a conflict of interest. They wanted to make sure if you owned specific stocks, you weren't allowed to like work on specific accounts, that kind of thing. So like if you bought stocks, you had to like disclose it, and I just didn't really want to deal with that, and I had no idea how to pick stocks, and I don't think that's actually a good way to get rich. I think it's kind of sounds very stressful to do, so I never considered picking individual stocks.
How much did you actually have saved up by the time you finally pulled the trigger?
When I quit, I had $690,000 saved. Yeah, $609,000 was my net worth.
Gotcha. So then, can you help us understand kind of the thought process between realizing you had enough and actually pulling the trigger? So maybe starting with your parents, how did you break the news to your parents?
Like I said, I had been thinking about this and talking about this for many, many years. So they were very fully aware of what I was planning on doing, and they were mostly on board. They knew. I'd call them, in the morning and be like, I didn't sleep last night. I've been working on this thing for like 2 days straight, and I'm so exhausted. So they just wanted me to be happy. So they were happy that I was happy. Um, my dad kind of questioned in the beginning, is like, you went to law school, you spent all this money and time on it, and you're sure you don't want to be a lawyer anymore. And when I said, I'm sure, it's like, okay, you're your own person, you're intelligent, you know what you're doing, you have to live your own life, and I'm just happy you're happy.
Got it. So it sounds like they didn't nudge you to maybe just transition to a lower stress career, but one where you were still, earning an income and had health insurance and all those things.
Honestly, I think they knew that if I wanted a job, I could find one later in life. It wouldn't be a huge deal. And they also kind of looked at the bright side that I could come visit them for 2 weeks at a time if I wanted to, and hang out with them for a long period. So I think they were happy about that part.
So in early retirement, so you've been retired for, I think you mentioned earlier, roughly 5 years or so. How many countries have you been able to long-term travel to during that time?
My total number right now is 68 countries. I don't know exactly how many I did during my 2.5 year stint. Like, when I was working, I traveled to at least one international country, one international trip a year at least. When I was a flight attendant, I hit a bunch of countries as well. So I want to say maybe 25, 30. I'd really have to like go back and check. It's not something I've ever thought about, to be honest.
What was the most memorable place that you traveled to during your after you early retired?
I spent most of my time in South America, I want to say. Like I said, I think this is something I have to go back and check. But I like doing the big countries, so then when I colored in my map, it would look really impressive. So, I'd go to like South America because it was it was easy flights from the U.S. Um, the time zone was similar, so I could, keep in touch with my family pretty easily. It was very low cost of living. The U.S. dollar was really strong in these countries, so I could rent an apartment for a month and have to be, tiny fraction of what I was allowed, quote unquote, to spend that month. Plus, I, took Spanish in high school, so I knew a little bit of Spanish, and so it was a little bit easier for me to get around.
Got it. So, in what ways does travel feel different as a long-term traveler versus just as a vacation traveler? So, I mean, I imagine you might be slow traveling more. There's likely to be homesickness and loneliness. What are some of the ways that travel feels different when you're traveling long-term nomadically?
I think a lot of the excitement for traveling is the anticipation, the build-up. Like when you're at work, you think, oh, only 6 more days until my vacation, only 5 more days, you're counting down and you're setting, everything up. And, whereas when you're long-term traveling, like that's just your life now. It's not exciting at all. It's just, this is what it is. And there are days where you don't actually go out and sightsee or don't really do anything. Whereas when you're short-term traveling, you're trying to make the most of every single day. So you go out and do things every single day. You're also, when you're short-term traveling, what you put packing your luggage is not that big of a deal. You can throw something in, just in case I need it. But when you're long-term traveling, every piece of anything you have in your luggage, has to have a very specific purpose. So it just feels more intentional, I guess, and maybe not in a good way. Like you're just very, very hyper aware of what you need and what you want. And I don't know. And then the loneliness. I think when you're short-term traveling, it's very easy to get someone to be like, oh, let's take a week off and go somewhere. But when you're long-term traveling, not very many people have the option to hang out with you for a month.
How did you deal with the loneliness?
Not well. I have something I do called Operation Enjoy the Crap Out of Life, which means I try to make plans to go and do something every single day. So I make sure that I had, some sort of human contact every day. Went to a lot of meetups. I went to like the couch surfing website and I, go and meet up with people that I met there and, make very deliberate effort to try to meet people. But I mean, the relationships you form when you're traveling are so transitory and so brief. And they're very intense because you spend a lot of time together in the beginning, but then you go your separate way or they go their separate way and you don't really think about them again. You're constantly trying to make new friends and it gets exhausting.
Yeah. So I know when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that you actually changed course in the middle and decided to slow down drastically the long-term travel. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process in making that decision and what's happened since?
Yeah, I long-term traveled for about 2.5 years, and I realized actually pretty early on that it was not probably the life for me. I wanted it to be the life for me because I've been thinking about doing it for so long, and it just seemed so appealing when I was working. Like, oh, I can travel and I can explore these different countries and meet all these new people, and I did that. But I don't know. I kept pulling up breadth instead of depth, and it didn't feel like a very satisfying life after a while. Like I would go someplace and I wanted to point out something to somebody, but there was nobody to point it out to. It was just me. So it just felt like the memories I was making, which is not as good, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep. So
it did take me a while to kind of decide to give up long-term traveling because it had been such a huge part of my identity for so long. Like I was a wanderer, I was a flight attendant before law school and I traveled every chance I got. After law school, I graduated in 2009 and that's when the recession happened. Lehman Brothers collapsed and I'd already had a job offer lined up and my law firm was incredibly generous in saying that, we don't have any work, but if you wanted to go do whatever you want for a year, we'll still pay you a third of your salaries. We'll pay your minimum student loans for a year. So in 2009, I graduated and my law firm paid me $77,000 to go do whatever I wanted. So I spent that year traveling. The travel was kind of in my blood. And then when I was doing it long term after I retired, giving it up and realizing that wasn't who I wanted to be. It took me a really long time to accept, and I just felt kind of like guilty and like I don't know how to explain to people this is not what I'm doing anymore. It just this has been talking up for so long, and now I'm abandoning it. Like, do people expect me to go back to work? And just I didn't really know how to live my retired life in one place. I mean, it took me a really long time to like decide that.
When you traveled that first year out of law school after the recession and your law firm paid you $77,000, um, did you encounter many of the issues that you've talked about regarding like loneliness, etc.? Did any of those issues crop up then, or no, because there was an end date when you knew you would have to go back?
I definitely remember feeling lonely at times, but it was still such an exciting new adventure that I did so many cool things during that time that it didn't feel as bad. I don't know what the difference was, to be honest, but like I just remember like I hitchhiked through Ireland and I got a job waiting tables in Melbourne, and I worked on a farm in New Zealand, and I did all these really random things that I didn't really do after I retired. Like after I retired, it was more about like traveling and like staying in a place for months and just kind of exploring as opposed to like doing these epic adventures. I don't really know what the mindset shift was, but I think it was maybe because like I knew I had a month. I knew I had a year rather. So like beforehand I like kind of made a plan for like, okay, this month I'm going to spend in Amsterdam, this month I'm going to spend here, and this month, you know what I mean? So like I knew beforehand what I was going to be doing. Whereas when I retired, I kind of took it like one step at a time. Like, all right, I'll go to the Cayman Islands to visit this friend and hang out for a while, and then I'll figure out when I'm there, what I'm going to do next. So there was no like planning beforehand. Whereas, when I had that year off, I had to like apply for a work visa for Australia, and then I knew I was going to be there for however many months and go from there. It was just a different mindset.
Gotcha. So, how have you been? Like, I guess, what have you been up to since you ended or slowed down rather long-term travel? And like, what does your daily life look like now?
Um, Before the coronavirus, I was doing a ton of writing, so I'd write at least 4 hours a day. Um, I had my blog, and I was working on a fiction novel. Um, I'd get up whenever I felt like it. I'd go out to eat dinner. I'd go out to eat to dinner with friends pretty much every single day. I'd go on a ton of dates. I'd walk outside in the sunshine every day. I'd read every day. Like last December, I had made the goal to like read a book a day. So I didn't quite end up doing that. I think I read like 23 or 25 books in December. So I was doing a ton of reading. Post-corona life is a little bit different because I'm not allowed to hang out with friends as much. So it's a little bit lonelier. But I'm still doing basically the same thing. I haven't been writing as much just because it feels a little pointless with the whole pandemic thing going on, and I don't really know how to get that back. But still doing a ton of Zoom calls and doing a ton of talking on the phone, not sleeping per usual.
You mentioned earlier when we were chatting that you, at least for now, decided to settle in Denver. And how did you decide? How did you decide on Denver?
It was a long process, to be honest. In 2017, when I decided I needed to stop traveling, I kind of wanted to transition into like being a full-time nomad into being a full-time settled down person. So I found these house sitting websites, and I joined like 3 or 4 of them. And I made a list of 17 cities where I could see myself living. And then I just applied to a bunch of house sitting gigs. And the first long-term house sitting gig I got was in Denver. So I was like, all right, I'm going to try out Denver for a while. So for 6 months in 2017, I lived all over Denver. I tried a bunch of suburbs. I tried Boulder. I tried North Denver, South Denver, et cetera, just to see if the city fit me. And during that time, I really liked it here, and the sunshine was great, and I made a lot of friends. So in 2018, I narrowed down my list a little bit, and I put on the list Chicago because my entire family is there, so that was an easy one. I had on my life bucket list: live in New York once, leave before it makes you hard, and live in Northern California once, and leave before it makes you soft.
Oh
that
yeah,
song.
the song, yeah.
Yeah. So I had New York and San Francisco on that list, and I put Denver on the list because I really liked it last year I was there. And I made this giant pro con list for every city. And in the end, I decided, against New York and San Francisco because they were just very expensive to live in. And if I wanted to live there, I'd have to get a job. And I just wasn't prepared to do that quite yet. Um, and I spent most of my adult life in Chicago, so I wanted something new. So I ended up picking Denver. And because of the cost of living, like I can rent an apartment here and it's pretty cheap and I don't have to, I don't have to worry about going back to work. And the sunshine is 300 days of the year shining on you, so it's very nice and easy to walk outside. Like vitamin D is a real thing. Like I definitely feel better when after I'm outside.
And good skiing, I imagine.
I went skiing once. I tried in January and I hurt my thumb, and I'm a little afraid to try it again. So.
Were any cities abroad on that list of cities that you were considering? And if so, what made you decide not to settle abroad, where you could potentially have the experience of long-term traveling, but also be settled at the same time?
Yeah, so the two cities abroad that were on my list were London and Vancouver, and I just didn't want to deal with being like the visa issue again. You have to. I don't know the exact number of days or rules, but like you'd have to like go back and forth if you're just doing the tourist visa. You have to leave every 3 months or 2 months or however how long it is. And I didn't know that I could make it feel like home. Sydney felt like home after 9 months. It took a really long time for me to feel like it was home. So I just wanted something like kind of settle in quickly.
Gotcha. So when you were long-term traveling, I know you traveled for two and a half years before you made the switch to settling down. What was the community of long-term nomadic travelers like as you experienced it? The sense of camaraderie or kinship, and if you could just help us, I guess, understand a little bit about the types of people you would meet, how you would meet them, and what that community was like.
I find that nomadic people are very excited to hang out with you, so they're very willing to say, yes, let's go do something. You have very intense, brief friendships. Like you'll hang out with them for 24 hours straight for like 3 or 4 days. But then they move on and you move on and you don't really think about them after that. Like I'm sure I'm Facebook friends with a lot of them, but I don't really go on Facebook very often. I have Facebook feed eradicator installed on my computer, so I don't see anybody's posts. So I just see like my events, my groups, and my messages. So I don't ever go on anyone's Facebook page to look at them. So I don't keep in touch that way. So we're friends, but not really. If that makes sense. It's a great friendship while it lasts, while you're hanging out with them. But I'm just bad at keeping in touch with people who don't physically live near me.
Were there any challenges you faced during your long-term travels as a solo traveler and or as a female traveler?
The internet makes it so easy to travel these days. Like I didn't feel like I didn't feel like I had any issues. Maybe I was super naive, but I never really thought of myself as in danger as a female traveler. Like I went to the Middle East. I went to United Arab Emirates. I went with my sister, so she was there with me, and I never felt unsafe. I went to Kuwait, but I went to visit a cousin of mine, so I never felt unsafe. I went to Qatar and Oman, but people, like, you find friendly people everywhere, honestly. Like, I never really felt like, my life was in danger or that anyone looked at me differently because I was a woman. And like I said, maybe that I'm being very naive about that, and I just got extremely lucky, but it was never an issue.
So what does your portfolio look like now, more than 5 years after early retirement? More or less than when you started? What's changed since?
So I officially record my net worth on December 31st of every year. And my sister will occasionally tell me, hey, the market's at a high. You should look at your portfolio if you want a little hit of dopamine, basically. So I never look at when it's down. I never pay attention to the market like in normal days unless my sister tells me to look at it. So I looked in January and my net worth was $1,025,000 in January. I don't know what the market's doing right now. I refuse to look, so I don't know what I'm standing at right now, but I'm not worried about it.
Got it. So after all that traveling and living for more than 5 years in early retirement, it's actually grown by, 50-ish%.
300,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's, it's been a crazy journey, but even after spending money and living what I want to do and spending whatever I want to spend, it's still growing.
so, there's commonly known in fire circles this 4% rule as a rough rule of thumb or heuristic for how much you can withdraw safely and outlast your retirement. At least when run historically, simulated historically, it works, like more than 95% of the time. How did you think about the safe withdrawal rate that you believed you could withdraw from your portfolio safely? And was it a simple application of the straightforward application of the 4% rule, or was there more nuance around it or variation around it? How did you think about that, both before and in early retirement?
Before I retired, I adhered to it pretty strictly. Like I said, I had my retirement chart where I charted my passive or my expenses each month and my projected passive income. And so the projected passive income is using the 4% rule. It takes into account inflation. It takes into account like historic stock market returns. So I use that pretty closely. After I retired, I didn't think about the 4% rule at all, to be honest. As I was getting closer to retirement, I would put a lot more money into cash. So I had about a year and a half's worth of expenses in cash. And then like partly 6 months, a year into my retirement and my exact date, I got a tax return back from my from the Australian government, and that gave me another year or so of expenses. So I didn't start taking it out until a couple of years ago, and then I just take out like about a year's expenses and just kind of leave it and think about it. Now I do about $10,000 at a time. I take it and I put it into my Vanguard money market fund and just transfer over money to my bank account when I need to pay bills. I think financially, what makes the most sense, like math-wise, would just be to do like a set amount each month from your investments into your bank account, like $2,000. But I just like having a little bit of cash to make me feel a little better.
Yeah, makes sense. When you were traveling, I was curious, when you were making the plans to travel, did the notion of, one day meeting somebody, potentially getting married, starting a family factor in, and where you knew that you were going to early retire, but also do that, have a family at the same time, and it would work out financially? Or if not, like, how did that end up changing your thinking over time?
I was kind of indifferent about kids, and I think if you're indifferent, that means no. So it was not really.
This is true. As the parent of a toddler now, I can definitely say that you definitely have to be intentional about it and want it.
Yeah, for sure. Especially since my parents were so loving and caring, and like they devoted their lives completely to their children. Like that's how I would want to raise my kids, and I just don't know that I have that in me. I'm closer to 38 at this point than I am to 36, and I not really felt my biological clock ticking. So I don't think kids are on the card for me, and I'm fine with that. I didn't budget for that. I didn't really plan for that, and I think if I had kids, like my retirement idea would be a lot different. I would love to get married. I'm single right now. I'm not seeing anyone, but I don't know. I assumed like one of my deal breakers is I can't date somebody who has credit card debt. Like I'm not going to be somebody's partner. I'm not going to be somebody's teacher or mother. I want a partner. So I'm assuming that if I did eventually find somebody, he would also have his own money, and then that would actually increase the cost of increase the quality of my life, because then I could like spend double on something I'd spend in an apartment, or spend half of what I'm currently spending, or whatever. So if it did factor in, it factored in as like a positive as opposed to a negative.
Gotcha. Has the coronavirus altered your plans in any way?
It's altered my day-to-day life, and just that I'm not hanging out with friends, right, really, and I'm not getting like the human interaction I think I need. But it is not. All right, I will say this, that I have been feeling a little useless since the coronavirus started, because the world just seems like it's kind of going to pieces, and I'm sitting here watching Law & Order SVU and not really doing anything else in my life. So I've been feeling a little guilty about that. Um, I have not really been able to write since the coronavirus started. It feels like frivolous and pointless. And I don't know, there's so many other things to think about that I'm really missing that part of my life. And I hope that I'll be able to get back someday. But I don't know that it has anything to do with my retirement life.
Got it. You know, when you think about the career or life paths of your classmates and peers, how do you not let what they're doing, whatever success they may be having, whatever, pretty Instagram lives they may be living, get to your head? Is that ever something that you grapple with?
Yes, absolutely. My solution was to get rid of Instagram.
Love it.
I went to my 10-year law school reunion last year, and I remember thinking that I made a horrible mistake, that everyone was so successful and so like prominent. They had these big important jobs, and I didn't, and I felt really guilty about that, and like maybe I lived my life wrong. But that was like a brief flit in a minute. When I was actually hanging out with them, when I'm back at home in my real life and I'm not in touch with them, like I like my life a lot, so it doesn't really occur to me unless I like, actively seek it out to talk to them, which I don't really do very often. As I said, I'm not very good at keeping in touch with people who aren't in my zip code.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you're anyway able to compartmentalize pretty well.
Yeah, yeah, and I also know that they're working crazy hours, so there's a two double-edged sword there.
What adventures from your bucket list are coming up that we should keep an eye out for in terms of future Anita sightings?
Gosh, I haven't looked at my bucket list in a really long time. I'm feeling a little aimless right now, a little bit driftless. Um, that is something I should definitely think about and do again. But I don't know. I don't have any goals right now, and it's very unlike me. I think the corona is just kind of taking over.
All right, cool. Well, listen, Anita, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. I really enjoyed our conversation. Where can listeners find out more about you, what you're up to?
I have a blog that I'm not great about updating these days. It's called thepowerofthrift.com. Um, yeah, I don't know. I do podcasts occasionally.
Your own
You
or
want to find
others?
me?
Oh, got it. Got it. Like this one today. Cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, we'll be sure to link to your blog in the show notes. Anita, thank you so much again for taking the time to chat with us, and look forward to seeing you on the road or in Denver or elsewhere.
Yeah, of course, no problem. It was great talking to you. It was fun.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye.